This week on the Canadian Tech Podcast, we have a live recording from Fireside Conference in Camp Walden at Palmer Rapids, Ontario. Here it goes.
The Canadian Tech Podcast is sponsored by Olio Digital Labs. Olio are the planners, designers, and developers of the apps used by some of Canada's biggest brands. Find out what Olio can do for you at oliodigitallabs.com. And we're also sponsored by CodeShip, continuous integration and delivery software that lets you ship your apps with confidence. Both CodeShip Basic and CodeShip Pro come with a free plan that grants 100 builds per month, unlimited projects, and unlimited users. Visit codeship.com today to find out which CodeShip product is right for you.
Welcome to the Canadian Tech Podcast. This is episode 131 for Saturday, September 9th, 2017, coming to you live from Fireside Conference in beautiful Camp Walden, Ontario. My name is Derek Silva.
I'm Jameson Roberts.
Jameson, how you doing?
It's been a long time.
Since you've been on the show? Yes.
Yeah, I know. It's been a long time since I've been on the show. Doing quite well. I mean, work's been keeping me busy. My kid's keeping me equally busy. And so
Kids?
Kid.
Okay.
I did not say kids.
It sounded like you said kids.
Kid.
Okay, fine. I know you have one. That's why I was asking.
No. I think we're going to be a one and done. So.
Okay, that's all right. Nothing wrong with that. So as I mentioned, we're here at Fireside Conference.
Mm-hmm.
We both had a heck of a drive. You way more so than me.
Oh, yesterday was not fun, but I got here 9 p.m., had a few beers, and everything was good.
I'm glad you trudged through Toronto traffic at like 3:30, 4 o'clock, and
going into Toronto was fine. It was coming out of Toronto, coming up to Camp Walden.
People were trying to get to Barrie and Oshawa and everywhere, Grimsby, everywhere else. Well, for those who don't know, Fireside Conference is this is the third annual event. It's a very I'll say a very Silicon Valley vibe in the sense that there's a lot of talk about entrepreneurship, leadership. There was a panel on, or a mini conference on early stage funding and pitching VCs and all that this morning, which was really interesting. There were a few panels yesterday. A couple got postponed because same reason you had issues, was transportation mostly. One thing you and I both went to this morning was CoinConf, which was really, really interesting. It wasn't just about digital currencies. It was about the blockchain as a whole and just different perspectives. A little bit more research focused, some real world practical applications. I should mention yesterday there was a really good talk by Robert Scoble, who I was surprised to see. Unfortunately, you missed it.
I would have killed to hear that one because that sounded phenomenal.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Robert Scoble, last I heard, works at Rackspace. He's kept saying we, referencing Caterpillar. So I don't know if that's just like a consulting client or whatnot, but he gets to see a lot of new, interesting stuff before anybody else because he's a huge evangelist, and he's consulted a lot. I don't know if he's been an investor at all, but he has some really, really neat insights into augmented reality, what we might see on Tuesday from Apple, all these different companies that they've bought over the last few years, and how you're actually going to see that technology integrated into the next iPhone, he thinks.
Forget Tuesday. Some of the stuff that's coming out of the demos of AR kits is phenomenal.
Well, and that's exactly what some of those acquisitions have led to, is AR kit. Like there was a company they bought that it's like buying Iris and turning it into Siri. That literally that company they bought that's AR kit.
Yeah, exactly.
And so some of the 2 or 3 of the other ones are all hardware related, and so he thinks you're going to see that on Tuesday in the phone. Maybe a new iPad. That's usually in the winter, though. So anyway, it's been phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
And I went kayaking. We're talking about going canoeing
after this.
And I was just about to ask somebody else who's also joining us before I even introduce him. We also have Ethan Buckman here. Ethan, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Ethan has a few different initiatives. You've got Trident? No.
Tendermint.
Tendermint.
Yeah.
And I know you have another one called...
Cosmos.
Cosmos.
Yeah.
You were also part of CoinConf this morning.
Yeah.
And you had some really, really good insight in terms of where currency has come from, where we are right now. You were saying some really interesting things during lunch about the former gold standard and that sort of thing, and decoupling from the U.S. dollar and the sort of implications that that's had. But we really wanted to have you on to, first of all, please tell us about Tendermint and Cosmos a little bit, and then we wanted to talk about blockchain in the real world. So we know it's being used beyond just research now, but we know that there are still a lot of Canadians, no doubt, who have no idea what it is. Okay, that's no problem. We could probably explain a little bit. I know you have a really good explanation. I heard it this morning. And where people might actually see it impacting their lives over the next 10 or 20 years. So, but first, please, Tendermint, Cosmos, what are you doing there?
Cool. So I'll give you a little bit of backstory that leads up to why I became enraptured essentially with Tendermint and what it's trying to do. So my background is in biophysics, and I studied like the origin of life and how complex systems emerge out of less complex ones ultimately, and there's sort of this greater than the sum of its parts kind of phenomenon that people are fascinated by. And then I had also started to get into like Austrian economics and ideas around sound money and learning about how the Federal Reserve works and, you know, a lot of things people don't actually know and take for granted, right?
Yeah.
And then I'd mess around by like walking into a bank and give them a $20 bill and ask for my gold, and the guy doesn't know what I'm talking about. But so anyway, so I see, you know, early 2013, I see Bitcoin on my radar, and, you know, I had ignored it about 6 months before because I tried to read up on it on Wikipedia and I didn't understand anything. Like I got through it, I was like, you know, what is a hash? Like it keeps mentioning hash. Like I smoke hash, but like I don't think that's what they're talking about, right? So I kind of ignored it, and then like 6 months later, I'm hearing about it again. So I revisited, and I forced myself to learn what a hash function is and all this kind of stuff. And it dawned on me one day that this was the phenomenon I was studying in the biophysical medium now happening in the digital medium, in a sense, like the origin of life and the emergence of sound money in a digital reality. And so I was totally captivated by this, especially because, and the way I was putting it back then was that, you know, if the internet was a breakthrough in biological communication, which effectively it was, because now we have a way, you know, dolphins can communicate around the world, something like that, right? Like they send out these echoes, they go really far, and, you know, they can swim, they can travel the whole world, no problem. But humans haven't really been able to do that to the same effect. You can make phone calls, but we don't really have this like world around, you know, capacity until the internet really came out and made everyone connected instantaneously, right? So it really was
to a certain extent being the same language as well.
Being in the same language, yeah, for sure. So it's a breakthrough in biological communication. And so what I saw with Bitcoin was that here what we have is built on that new form of communication. We now have a breakthrough in biological organization, because for the first time we have a way for large groups of people who otherwise may not trust each other to coordinate without some central controller, right? And, you know, this has been like the effective issue that societies have been dealing with for, you know, thousands, if not 10,000 years, is how do we organize ourselves without empowering one individual too much, because he'll be able to corrupt us and take advantage and so on, right? And democracies have arguably been one response to that, but it seems like democracies are operating on too large a scale to really represent the needs and wants and values of individuals at a more local level, right? So here I saw an opportunity to actually start to use these kinds of protocols, these internet protocols, what are now called consensus protocols, to organize humans in much different ways than we thought possible before.
Right.
And so this idea of distributed consensus, of keeping many computers or many agents potentially distributed all over the world in sync, even though some of them don't trust each other, really just totally captivated me, because it felt a lot like what goes on in an ecosystem or in an organism, where you have all these pieces that are to some extent acting against each other, but yet manage to operate in a coherent whole, right? And so and then I heard about Ethereum at the end of 2013, and by 2014, I was like hacking on it all the time, writing smart contracts, contributing code. And so it basically became my life's mission to start using this technology to reduce the transaction costs and the barriers to entry for humans to form, you know, functional self-sufficient organizations, right? And so the thing that really stood out was that in order to do this properly, we need really good consensus protocols. We need software that does this really effectively. right? And so consensus software has existed for, I don't know, a decade or two. And the literature goes back to the late 1970s. And every major internet provider uses a consensus protocol somewhere at the bottom of their stack, right?
Yeah.
Because they have to keep machines in sync all over the world. But the difference with them is all of those machines are trusted. They're operated by a single entity, right? So what we need is a consensus protocol that can operate in an environment that is a untrusting, potentially adversarial, multi-stakeholder environment. Right. And we call those kinds of protocols Byzantine fault tolerant, which means that not only can they tolerate failures like crashing, like a machine goes down or it loses power, whatever, it can tolerate explicitly malicious or adversarial activity, what are known as Byzantine faults. For good reason.
Byzantines get blamed for everything.
They get blamed for everything. Yeah, they weren't so bad, you know?
Should mention we do have an audience. If you hear some laughing, it's not a laugh track.
Yeah,
Thank you, folks, for showing up. But yes, so anyway, please.
Yeah, so there hasn't really been, so Byzantine fault tolerant research, also goes back to the early 80s. It was originally formulated as like the Byzantine generals problem. This is the idea that you have a bunch of Byzantine generals and they're trying to coordinate to attack Rome. And the problem is one of them might be a traitor. He might be a liar. And so how can they come to consensus on what time to attack Rome if one of them is lying, right? And so this is the essential problem, even in a distributed network. If one of the computers is malicious or taken over by an adversary and is trying to lie and split the network, how can you still achieve consensus, right? So this is the critical problem we have to solve, to have these consensus protocols operating, kind of in the context that I was imagining they might be able to operate in. And so I was working on this Ethereum stuff, and I was looking for a consensus protocol that could actually achieve all this, and I discovered, I guess, on a podcast, this guy, Jaquan, who was working on this thing called Tendermint, that was doing exactly this. He had taken a classic academic Byzantine fault-tolerant protocol, upgraded it to be more modern, to use better cryptography, to be a little faster, to operate in the context of a blockchain, to support a currency. And I was like, this is it. I have to work with this guy. And so I started working with him. I reached out to him over the internet. I met him in San Francisco. We lived together for a few years. And by early 2016, we had founded this company together, Tendermint, to actually build this stuff full time. He already had a working implementation of the software. I came in to, help upgrade it and actually make it feature complete and battle test it and all this stuff. Nice. And it's getting to that point now. And so it's starting to be recognized as basically the state of the art implementation of Byzantine fault tolerant consensus on the planet. But we went further than that. We didn't just want a Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus protocol. We wanted something that was easy to build on top of, right? Because if it's difficult to build on top of, and you're kind of confined to some esoteric environment, no one's going to use it, right? And having been hacking on Ethereum for a while, I wasn't just using stock Ethereum. I was trying to make modifications to it to make it relevant to enterprise opportunities or to governments or whatever. And I found it was very difficult because it's a very monolithic stack, and you have to kind of address the whole thing at once, and it's not very modular. So we figured out a way to break apart the general blockchain stack into two pieces. You have the consensus piece, and you have the application piece, right? And all the consensus is responsible for is replicating the application and keeping it in sync. And the application handles all the application logic, the transaction semantics, the cryptography, all this kind of stuff. And so we found a way to make that separation so that Tendermint is just pure consensus, and it enables you to build your application in any programming language you want, which was unlike any other blockchain stack out there. So we've gotten a lot of traction with that. A lot of people are building on it in different languages, using it for different things. I think Oracle is using it now, and lots of other big companies. Cool. And so now what we wanted to do is, now that we've built this piece, we wanted to get back to our roots of like public cryptocurrency, freeing people from banks and from censorship and from high fees and unreasonable hours and all this kind of stuff. Bitcoin is great, but it also has a lot of flaws. It's slow, it's expensive. You may have an environmentalist bend and you don't like the proof of work. It wastes like more electricity than Iceland or something. It's a little bit ridiculous, but we can talk about how it's valuable too. And so we decided we would build out, using Tendermint, this modular engine that lots of people can build on top of. We decided we would use it ourselves to build a public cryptocurrency network that solved what we saw as some of the outstanding problems in the cryptocurrency field, namely things like scalability, interoperability, speed, and security. And so using the properties of Tendermint and the design of this proof-of-stake cryptocurrency system, we feel we're going to be able to address those things. And so that network is called the Cosmos Network. We hope to launch it later this year, hopefully in December. And start building out from there. It's sort of like a play at the internet of blockchains, right? Right now we have many many different blockchains, and they're all kind of independent of one another.
Right.
There's no nice way for them to work together.
Right.
So we're trying to build tools and protocols and technologies to enable sort of a more cohesive ecosystem.
Okay, neat. So, there's a lot we could potentially unpack there.
Oh yeah.
We don't have all night though.
I'm sorry, but you
No.
asked for it.
I did. No, you're right. I absolutely did. I put myself right there.
Uh-huh.
No, but so I'm going to try and explain blockchain. The way I think most people can understand it.
Blockchain 101.
Yeah, sure. And it's going to be it's super quick. If I'm fundamentally off, please let me know. But I've seen this elsewhere, and I think it helps. Blockchain essentially, you had single ledger accounting a long time ago. Then you had double ledger, and all of a sudden everything is much, much better and more accurate and all that. And essentially, blockchain, you could look at it as like triple ledger accounting in the sense that you have a copy, right? So Jameson sends money to me. He has a copy of that transaction. I have a copy of that transaction. And now this blockchain has a third immutable third copy of this transaction that other people could potentially check to verify that it did in fact happen the way you said it happened and the way I thought it happened as well. That okay for most laymen?
For sure.
Okay, terrific, good. I'm not completely off base. A lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people have heard about Bitcoin. You mentioned earlier. There's Ripple XRP, of course, that is in a lot of commercial applications now with the banks. I know RBC and CIBC are on board. We've talked about that on the show previously. 40 or 50 other banks, big ones too, are actually using it to send money between each other instead of SWIFT or other clearing houses, which is saving them over the long run, I'm sure, millions of dollars.
Not billions.
No, not billions. Not yet.
If not billions.
Oh, if not billions.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
maybe. Yeah.
Potentially, yeah. It depends, obviously, on how much they're moving.
Sure.
So that's a real-world application, but it's not public-facing, right? So what I wanted to talk about is okay, so people can understand really basically, it's a third copy of the transaction that happened. All of the nodes in the network have a copy of that transaction and can all agree, as you mentioned earlier, with consensus protocol that it did happen, and therefore it's really hard to fake, right, or to reverse, because as somebody mentioned this morning, you'd literally have to alter the last entry in the ledger and every single one before that in order to fake something. Almost, damn near impossible at this point. Potentially with quantum computing later, fine. When we're dealing with millions of universes, I'll worry about that later. I'm not worried about that right now. But beyond that, I mean, basically anything that's data and can be stored in a database type thing in a ledger can use blockchain in some way to either potentially replace a SQL database, I think, or provide an immutable,
Trusted source.
trusted version of this data. One thing we heard this morning was a startup partnering with the government of Honduras to actually create a property record or a property ownership record database instead of the old way of filing paperwork and possibly storing it in a database, in a computer database. You've got some sort of ledger. I don't know if it's Hyperledger or something like that, but some sort of blockchain technology underlying that. Beyond cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, over the next few years, like what do you think is potentially the next big use that like the normal public will actually see or use day to day?
It's an interesting question. So some people think, and myself potentially included, that they won't really see it the same way they don't really see TCP/IP. Right?
Okay.
So
okay.
it to a significant extent will probably be a back-end protocol that will enable new functionality that the average person won't really stop to think about.
Sure. Which is usually the case.
Which is usually the case, fair enough,
This is just magic and fairy dust, right?
That's right. And,
Isn't that what Apple likes everything to be?
Yeah, don't get me started. It's magical. No, Steve, it's not. It's your thousands of engineers working overtime 2 weeks before your keynote to make sure this thing works on stage.
Exactly.
But anyway.
So same thing. I think a significant component of global financial infrastructure will be ported to these systems. What will the net result of that be? It ought to be reduced fees, reduced wait time, so higher throughput, and ultimately better service, less lost transactions, so less kind of chaos on the back end.
Right.
Lower incidence of fraud, higher transparency, so essentially less, not just less fraud like criminals hacking your credit card kind of thing, but less fraud by the actual high ups, like the executive kind of fraud that is less talked about, like the white collar stuff, which is really the stuff I'm mostly concerned about. Now, a lot of people are looking for like, what is the killer use case? What's the killer application of blockchain? I think we know what it is. It's currency, and it seems like people are hesitant to admit that, and it's because, at least as far as I can tell, they don't really understand currency. No one really understands currency. They feel like it's not going to work unless it's a government-backed thing, right? Arguably, something like gold, which is kind of universally recognized as valuable for whatever reason, has been replicated here with Bitcoin in a digital version. And I like to say now that gold is the poor man's Bitcoin, so to speak. And so Bitcoin certainly as like a hedge against the dollar and as like this global digital decentralized payment system. Why is that valuable? Well, increasingly there are, the list of things the government doesn't approve of is always growing, right? And there might be things that are totally legal. Like, for instance, cannabis is legal in a number of states, but because it's still illegal federally, a lot of these companies have a hard time or an impossible time getting a bank account, right? Or sometimes, like I read this horror story the other day about someone running a totally legitimate operation in the UK, banking with HSBC, who is very well known for laundering like billions of dollars of Mexican drug cartel money,
Yes,
right?
they are.
And so now they have this like insane compliance program that is just super trigger happy. So this guy who's running a completely legitimate bank account or completely legitimate business with a banking with HSBC lost total control of his bank account, got shut down, and no one there could give him a reason why or a good answer, and he's just been having the worst time getting access to those funds. He hasn't been able to access those funds, so he can't pay his people, like all his services, now because his credit card's maxed out and he can't pay it off. All the services are shutting down, so imagine you're running an internet service and you've got your Gmail accounts, you've got your AWS, you've got your Dropbox, you have all this crap, and all of a sudden they start closing it down because you don't have access to your bank account, right? In a situation like that where like the guy's not even doing anything wrong, he's not even like on any kind of like shady list of anything. He's not even like selling pot. It's a legit business, but just a trigger happy bank meant that, now he can't access the capital. So the fact that with Bitcoin or with these cryptocurrencies, you have complete and utter control of your finances is going to be hugely powerful in situations like this as a backup. And as these legacy systems continue to fail in like a cascading way, and it's inevitable because they're horribly built, everyone knows it. No one pays enough attention to IT security and to like clean. I mean, look what just happened to Equifax, right? They just got hacked. Like, so sorry. Instead of ranting about what I was just ranting about, I'm going to transition to Equifax because I'm moving to Toronto. I live in Guelph. I've been living there for like 7 years. I love that place. If you live in Ontario, go visit Guelph.
Been there, done that.
Yeah,
Nice.
great. So I'm moving back to Toronto, and I need to rent an apartment, which apparently meant I needed to do a credit check.
Yes.
I was like, what is this credit check thing, right? So I've never had to do this before. Like, why would I, right? But I've had like 8 credit cards over the years because I was sign up at Canadian Tire, like pretty girl, like sure, I'll the excuse to talk to her, throw away the credit card later, right? Sure enough, I do this credit check thing, and I find out I have horrible credit because of like, I paid off some credit card and then it charged me interest of like 60 cents like 2 years ago, and I didn't know, and so then like it got deactivated, and like now my credit rating is shit, and I'm like, hit. Yeah, I'm not supposed to swear. I'm on the air here. Sorry. So
I'll try to remember to bleep it out later. If not, Apple will deal.
yeah, sorry guys. So I'm freaking out about this thing. Like, how are they operating? Like, this is like a criminal operation, this organization, that not only do they have this massive liability of holding on to everyone's like critical personal and financial data, they're like abusing it. And so many legitimate, honest, working people have probably been restricted from accessing capital simply because of this antiquated system.
Sure.
And then, sure enough, this week, we find out they have been hacked, and like half of the population of the United States, their most personal financial information has now been leaked.
Social security numbers,
home address, like everything.
It's
right?
one thing to It's one thing to get a new credit card. It's another thing to get a new social insurance number.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
or
and there is
date of birth.
Yeah, and there is Canadian records apparently exposed here. We don't know how many. Apparently, it's mostly Americans.
Right.
And Brits as well.
Yeah.
Again, we don't know how many. We just know roughly 143 million total. Some Canadians, some UK, mostly Americans. Well,
No.
the US has more population, a bigger population than the UK and Canada combined. So yes, of course, it's going to be mostly Americans.
Sure.
But like that sort of thing is absolutely very troubling. We're not going to have our normal news thing this week, but that is good to bring up because it was recent. That was Thursday or Friday that happened, that we found out about it. And absolutely, you're right. It's terrible. And so, please continue.
So, it's funny. People are always saying like you got to remember to like change your password like periodically, like every 3 months, every 6 months, or something. So I saw a funny tweet that was like, guys, remember to change your last name, your home address, and your social security number like every 6 months, right? It's like, yeah, that's what happens when you have this like huge centralization of data.
Yeah.
So. What the blockchain is going to offer is ways to do that without creating this massive liability on a centralized third party who we know for certain does not pay nearly enough attention to their cybersecurity needs.
Certainly know
right?
that now.
Like,
Yeah.
we definitely know that
most
now.
companies
Most
don't.
companies don't. And the amazing thing, it blows my mind that we're still operating in this kind of paradigm where every single time I use a credit card, I am trusting the vendor with all of the information necessary to take money from my credit card.
Yeah.
And like, sure enough, there's insurance and fraud protection and all this kind of crap.
Yeah.
But the fact that we were operating in a system that is that fundamentally insecure just astounds me. So with the blockchain technology and with like very basic cryptography, stuff that's been around since the 70s, we can avoid all of that. I can make payments as many as I want and never reveal any amount of secret information that will allow anyone to take anything from me.
Right.
Sure enough, that creates a much greater responsibility for myself. I have to protect that information. If I lose it, my money's gone.
You lose your Bitcoin wallet or your Dogecoin wallet or whatever.
Right.
It's all on you. Which
It's all on me.
People don't like.
Right. Right. My
What do you
mother's
mean
certainly
the
not
banks-
comfortable with that.
Yeah. What do you mean the bank's not going to cover me for
Right.
anything past $100?
Right.
That I mean, like I in a way I prefer it because then it is all on me.
Yeah.
And and at the same time I get way more control,
Right.
as you've mentioned.
So some people like the personal responsibility. I think it's good to have a mix of both. You want to be in the banking system so that you have like the customer support, even though it's generally crap. It's like one bar under Rogers maybe, but you also want to have that personal control so that if something goes wrong with the banking system, which it regularly does, then you still have access to capital that you control fundamentally,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So the point was that essentially that like this liability that we're constantly creating by trusting everyone with all this like personal sensitive data is a huge drain on the economy because of the insurance needs and the payouts, right?
Yes.
So they have to protect all this information. There's no good reason for them to have to. We have the cryptography to avoid it. There are solutions to the personal responsibility problem. I mean, personally, I like personal responsibility. I like to like be in charge and know that I'm like self-sufficient or whatever. Not everyone wants that, and that's fine. Like we don't all have to be like hardcore Spartans or whatever the case may be, right? But and there are solutions that people are working very hard on. But the fact that we're trusting everyone with all this like super critical personal data is just a huge can of worms, a huge drain on the economy. So what the blockchain can provide are alternative ways to do that in a more decentralized manner where you don't have a central liable third party, where something like the Equifax hack can't happen, where you can still have something like a credit score, something like a reputation with regards to how creditworthy or how responsible you've been in the past that is easier to update, that isn't quite as slow, that's much more responsive to your needs, and that still remains private. And you'd still be able to prove to people, yes, my credit score is this is my information, without being liable to it, being hacked and exposed. So, that's not the kind of thing that like your regular average everyday person is going to be like, good thing blockchain is in my life because of that. It's not like face to face, like your cell phone in your pocket kind of technology.
Right.
It's more like the crisis kind of avoidance thing. Like what kind of sustainable, robust infrastructure can we put in place to reduce the periodicity and the impact of these kinds of huge crises, right?
Yeah.
And things like the global financial system meltdown of 2008, like that's coming again. We haven't solved any of those problems.
Yeah.
And hopefully the blockchain tech will be able to pick up enough of the slack to provide like the accountability and the transparency and the responsibility to prevent that in the future.
Okay.
I do have one question.
Sure.
And this
Are we almost out of time? Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Almost, yeah.
we're barely about 5
Jeez,
minutes.
I'm
so-
sorry, guys.
No, it's all good.
ranted.
I thought we had more. You
Uh-huh.
know, this is like a 45-minute timer. It's
Okay.
like I thought we had more. So anyway,
Anyway,
We'll have to do
so-
it again.
Yeah, exactly. So this is sort of a fallback to the personal responsibility, because there are going to be varying levels of that. But I think one of the things that is probably going to be one of the largest hamperers to a lot of mass adoption to things like Bitcoin and those things is the lack of that fallback path. If you lose your wallet,
For sure.
you're SOL.
Yeah.
Right.
So how do you reconcile the need, the apparent need,
Yeah.
the fundamental need with blockchain technology and
Yeah.
and cryptocurrencies to have that sort of single source of truth and that one axis only, but also provide users with that sort of peace of mind of,
For sure.
there is maybe a chance I can
Yeah.
recover something.
There are a lot of things you can do, and there are a lot of clever approaches to this. And this is something the community's been wrestling with for a long time. For instance, the Bitcoin exchanges get hacked, and all of a sudden, all that money is gone, right? So people have been grappling with what kind of changes can we make to the protocol so that there's a sort of fail stop, so that you have some time to respond, right? And there's a lot you can do, and especially you can do things like multi-sig. That's like, I can only spend the money if I sign off on it, or if like 3 out of 5 of these trusted entities sign off on it. And then you can have legal agreements with local entities. Like, the point of this stuff isn't to like outlaw the legal system. Like, don't listen to the hardcore crypto anarchists. It's not going to happen, right? I mean, that's who built the stuff in the first place, but ultimately, like, we can make society better with, still having governments and taxes and all the stuff we're used to.
Practicality takes over at some point.
Practicality, yeah, but we can still use the legal system to make this stuff even better and more accessible and so on, right? And so the ultimate use case that I'm most excited about, I guess, is really empowering more local economics and governance, and so using this kind of tech so that people can have more participation and more control over what is happening within government, where the money is going, how it's being used, and what the outcome of those uses are. More active voting and participation, and just better ways to track that, and more accountable, so that what the politicians are up to, and also to have local currencies. I think local currencies are going to be critical to a sustainable future. And this kind of technology, lots of people have experimented with local currencies, but they're very expensive to maintain when you're using paper, right? But once we can use these distributed consensus systems and run it locally and have it integrated with the legal system, a whole host of opportunities opens up for like sustainable infrastructure and for like social good, right? Like, we can issue the currency to people bringing value and bringing wealth and bringing like, education and food, good local food and all this kind of stuff into that community. So it totally changes the game on the definition of value and how we think about money. And that's the stuff I'm really most excited about. And maybe it's a bit naive, but I think that could have a huge impact on people moving forward.
Almost like any use case that gets picked up, I think could. So I know we got to wrap up, but I just do want to mention, like, there are a few other ones I've been thinking of, and I've heard of other places, things like being able to independently verify rather quickly, like college and university transcripts.
Yes, accreditation is a huge one.
Accreditation is huge. I'm pretty sure I worked with someone recently who totally faked their way in and said they had a diploma or degree from somewhere. I don't think they did.
So it's similar to the credit check problem that we're talking about. It's accreditation, essentially.
Financial records, of course, beyond just transactions, account balances, that sort of thing, I think could be done there. We mentioned property ownership records, medical records. Yeah. Right? Same, like, they have HIPAA in the U.S., which is designed to tell healthcare organizations all these different things they need to do that they're supposed to do in order to protect medical records and maintain a HIPAA compliance. I've studied all that stuff. It's mostly BS. Like, it's mostly feel-good stuff. Like, you need to go way above and beyond what HIPAA recommends. And a lot of it's just process. Make sure you have controls for this and that. What about the firewall? What about network segmentation and all this other sort of stuff? It's not mentioned. It's like financial accounting type stuff, or like stuff that accountants would feel good about, or lawyers. And of course we have what's the Canadian PIPEDA, PIPEHDA, similar to HIPAA, but for Canadian electronic health records. And then, of course, you mentioned voting.
Yeah.
I think that would be huge.
Voting's a huge one.
Estonia's been doing online voting.
So this
for
is
a long
actually the
time.
first production use case of Tendermint. We built the back end for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nomination vote back in October. We ran it on it didn't need a blockchain then, but it will in the future. And it'll be really cool to actually have voting technology running on the blockchain. So I think that's a great one.
Yeah, I think that's how you solve a lot of the hesitations around being able to hack a single database and make changes, etc. You can't, right? You download the client, you make your vote, your client has a record, the nodes have records, etc. So I think that's really how we do it. Ethan, thank you so much.
I
think
guys.
a lot of people have
fun.
learned a little bit about what we can actually see. Maybe we won't see it necessarily face to face, but it could increase the availability of a lot of things that we think, and maybe stop RBC, Scotiabank, TD from raising all their prices so often.
And ripping us off all the time. Yeah.
Right.
Great.
Thanks a lot. So for the Canadian Tech Podcast, my name is Derek Silva.
I'm Jameson Roberts.
And I'm Ethan Buckman.
Thank you, and have a great day.
Cool. That was so fun.
Thank you guys.
Olio Digital Labs is one of Canada's most accomplished small market agencies, delivering web apps and mobile apps to businesses across Canada. In an era of persistent connectivity and pervasive mobile devices, it has become more important than ever before for businesses to be everywhere their employees and customers are. That's why Olio provides its clients with the peace of mind only a highly skilled and experienced team can provide. A team that is big enough to support your needs, but flexible enough to work to your constraints. With a client list spanning from the Middlesex London Health Unit and Ellison Travel and Tours, all the way up to College Pro and the Home Depot, the team at Olio has proven itself to be the planners, designers, and builders of the web and mobile apps used by some of Canada's largest brands. Find out what Olio can do for you by calling 226-785-0420 or visit oliodigitallabs.com to learn more. That's Olio Digital Labs, code that powers every day.
And we're also brought to you by CodeShip. CodeShip is a SaaS-delivered continuous integration and delivery solution that lets you ship your apps with confidence. You can choose between CodeShip Basic or CodeShip Pro. The Basic service is a simple testing and deployment service with pre-installed CI dependencies that works right out of the box, making the average setup time less than 3 minutes. Or give CodeShip Pro a try. CodeShip Pro is a fully customizable, continuous integration and delivery service with native Docker support, and it is a lot easier to use than Jenkins. It makes it easy to test and deploy your microservices and push to any registry. It's also perfect if you want to deploy with Kubernetes, and it comes with a convenient local CLI tool that allows you to run your builds locally, helps encrypt your environment variables, and guarantees 100% parity between your development and production environments. Both CodeShip Basic and CodeShip Pro come with a free plan that grants 100 builds per month, unlimited projects, and unlimited users. And of course, open source projects are always free on CodeShip. So visit codeship.com today or check out codeship.com/features to find out which CodeShip product is the best fit for you. We'd like to thank Daniel Levine and Stephen Pulver once again for inviting us to Fireside Conference. It has been an incredible weekend. We will come back home with great memories, and hopefully join Fireside 2018. Thanks for listening.